All right, joining us live right here in New York City is Ben Shapiro, editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire and host of the Ben Shapiro Show. It's a podcast wildly successful. You're in town because you were just roasted by Commentary Magazine, right?
Yeah, it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. I'm used to receiving a lot of hate, so receiving it in person though, was a nice thing.
Was there one? Yeah. Was there one particular line that stood out, either
it made you mad
from somebody who was roasting you or you as a roastee?
Well, Dana Perino kept calling me short, and I found that particularly insulting because Dana's a tiny human. And
right.
There's that.
She was stressing about how to roast because she usually doesn't have that abrasive part of her personality.
I was shocked by the cruelty of Dana Perino.
Did you? And you roasted back, didn't you?
Yeah, Jasper came in for a couple of hits.
And that's, of course, her dog.
All right. Meanwhile, from Commentary Magazine to the New York Times, what do you make of the New York Times being caught not only in having to apologize for an inappropriate tweet, but then an editorial note fixed on this news analysis that said, essentially, yeah, you know what? We left out the fact that the woman involved in this story does not remember this story.
Yeah, I would say that it's unbelievable, except it's insanely believable. Every time the New York Times makes a mistake, it is always in the direction of somebody on the right getting clocked, and that's particularly true in the Kavanaugh story. I mean, there was a much bigger story in that book that was not reported by the New York Times, namely that Leland Kaiser, who is the best friend of Christine Blasey Ford, said she didn't believe Ford's story and was pressured by Ford's allies to change her story. And the New York Times didn't see fit to report that. They buried this particular story in their news analysis section, so they didn't have to run it through the news section. And then they actually removed the line that said that the alleged victim didn't remember the incident in question and then replaced it later. I mean, that's not just bad journalism. No. That's not botchery. I mean, that's purposeful at that point.
So let's see them try to explain themselves out of this. Let's see the two writers of the book talked about what they wrote for the opinion section of the newspaper and then how it was edited out. See if you buy this.
There was no desire to withhold important information from our readers. We have all of it in the book. During the editing process, there was an oversight and this key detail about the fact that the woman herself has told friends she doesn't remember it and has not wanted to talk about it, got cut. And it was an oversight. We're a team at the New York Times. We have processes in place.
I think actually the way it happened was the editors being concerned about naming her. In that sentence that had her name, it also had that she doesn't remember it. We also took out the fact that she didn't remember it.
Is there even a victim? I mean, she doesn't remember it.
No, I mean, there is no story here, right? And then this prompted editorials from the New York Times and the Washington Post talking about how the FBI was engaged in a sham investigation based on them not investigating an allegation that has no alleged victim. I mean, it's insanity.
Right, but do you buy that explanation?
No, of course I don't buy the explanation. That's not an oversight. How is it an oversight when you don't just remove the name, you remove the key detail of the entire story? It's not a detail. That is the center of the story.
But the center of the story was from a man who used to be an attorney for Bill Clinton.
During the impeachment, yeah.
And he would not speak to the authors of the book either, and only spoke through two other people who were officials who we don't know who they are.
You mean the nonpartisan attorney? Because that's what they wrote, the nonpartisan attorney.
That's right.
A nonprofit or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. The whole thing is absurd. They ignored the real story. But that is the New York Times Timesing.
Right. And what about every presidential candidate that immediately called for Kavanaugh to be impeached on a story that had no substance?
You mean Democrats don't care about due process? I mean, again, and it's always Brett Kavanaugh. They should just make him the face of we don't care about due process. Like every time they say they don't care about due process, they should just flash his picture.
All right, what about Biden and his latest blunder? He said his tax credit's going to put 720 million women back in the workforce.
Well, that's good.
The problem is there are only 330 million Americans. Listen to this.
You get a tax break for a racehorse. Why in God's name couldn't we provide an $8,000 tax credit for everybody who has child care costs? It would put 720 million women back in the workforce. It would increase the GDP, to sound like a wonk here, by about 0.8%. It would grow the economy.
Okay, he never sounds like a wonk in defense of Joe Biden. But what about those numbers? Have you looked in those numbers? Because I know you're very good at math.
Population.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that doesn't add up. I will say that this is all baked into the cake for Joe Biden. I mean, we all know that he is stumbling into objects and that he is just searching for an early bird dinner at Denny's and drinking cans of Ensure and forgetting where he is on a routine basis. But I think that's baked into the cake. I think everybody sort of knows that. In fact, I take the perspective that in the general election, it might not be bad for him to look senile and old and ineffectual because, honestly, at least he doesn't look dangerous. Right? I mean, if you're trying to run somebody against President Trump and you don't want to scare the American population, Joe Biden is the face of not scary because what's scary about a guy walking around tennis balls on the bottom of his
But what do you make of the fact that Elizabeth Warren, while she's in second or third place, she's doing a little better. She's kind of nudging herself past Bernie.
Yeah, I mean, if she picks up the rest of Bernie Sanders' support, obviously she's the front runner. The big problem for Elizabeth Warren remains and will continue to be the fact that she has no black support. Right? I mean, the fact is that Joe Biden retains an enormous share of black support, and that's because he was vice president to Barack Obama. Elizabeth Warren is whiter than I am by a large stretch, and the idea that she's going to start picking up black support from Joe Biden in the absence of Biden having a fall into the van like Hillary Clinton moment, I think, is probably.
But I will say this, she also has almost no Midwestern support. The middle of the country does not like Elizabeth Warren, and I talked to a Democrat on Monday who said if she gets the nomination, Donald Trump gets 4 more years.
I think that a lot of Democrats are worried about that, which is why I say that despite the fact that Joe Biden is older than Methuselah, there's a shot that actually cuts in his favor a lot more than Elizabeth Warren, this crazed radical from Harvard.
I'm picturing him cutting the X's in the tennis balls and Methuselah and falling into the van.
Right.
Some interesting images.
So you're saying Joe Biden's the only Democrat who has a shot at winning?
I mean, I don't think he's the only one who has a shot, but he certainly has the best shot. I mean, I would say that Donald Trump has an advantage against every other Democrat. Against Joe Biden, he is default Democrat because he basically is the body in Weekend at Bernie's, and all you have to do is walk him out there around.
Rob, but all the polls say he's not winning against any Democrat that ever ran for office ever.
Well, I mean, he may not win the primaries, but exactly what makes him appealing in the general election is what makes him vulnerable in the primaries.
Ben, have you enjoyed your appearance here?
Of course.
Right,
Yes,
good job.
he rose to Joe Biden.
Yes, absolutely.
By the way,
Thanks,
Dana
Ben.
Perino's waiting for you just outside.
Right, she is very angry.
I'm physically afraid of it.
All right,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben Shapiro.